And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about the commanders that made me fall in love with this format. My transition into the commander format happened like I imagine a lot of people did. I played other formats, right? I played Modern particularly, and of course, very competitive format. Of course, Commander at that time was starting to get a lot more buzz. I started seeing videos about it on YouTube and all this kind of stuff. Started getting me interested, and I started formulating ideas of decks that I could make as I grew more interest in the Commander format. And because I was playing Modern, a very competitive format, I thought in that Modern mentality, that very competitive mentality when I was thinking about decks. And my first commander ever was Narset, Enlightened Master, as I've talked about on my channel before. I was making a more janky version though. I wasn't doing the extra combats, extra turns. I just made every spell in my deck non-creature so that I'd be getting lots of value out of it, right? Again, that's sort of my thing, making value-y decks. My next commander was Traxa, because that had just came out, and of course, very cool commander. And of course, one of the reasons I stopped playing commanders like that is rule number one for me: don't make yourself a target. But the main reason why I stopped playing commanders like that and started moving in other directions is because of what I saw other people doing. And I was seeing other people play these super interesting, unique decks, and I honestly got jealous, and I wanted to be doing that too. I made a video a long time ago at the very beginnings of my channel talking about Mistform Ultimus. This was the first commander deck that I ever played against where, I mean, as you would imagine, I'm sure a lot of people have had this same interaction. When they first start playing the commander format, you see this guy and you're like, that seems really bad. Like, what are you going to do there? You know, like, I'm playing a Traxa. Look at all the things I can do with it. You're just playing a mono blue commander that has every creature type. Of course, before the changeling ability even existed, Mistform Ultimus was essentially the first ever changeling, right? 3 and a blue illusion, 3/3. Mistform Ultimus is every creature type. So this is an ability. It's essentially the changeling ability, right? It's an ability that is giving Mistform Ultimus every creature type. And as I saw this individual playing their deck, I saw the things that they were doing. They were sort of using their commander as like a reverse Lord effect, where because my commander's every creature type, I can take advantage of the Lord effects that I am putting in my deck. I thought it was incredibly clever, and it really got me thinking differently about the commander format. And of course, I was saddened the day when I saw Orvar the All form, which of course is literally a strict upgrade to Mistform Ultimus. Although I will make the argument, again, as I already talked about in this video, why would you ever play Mistform Ultimus instead of playing Orvar the All form? Because it doesn't make you a target, right? Because people are going to see Mistform Ultimus in the command zone and they're going to giggle at your silly deck. Whereas Orvar, of course, is a super powerful commander and you'll be the arch enemy right out of the gate, likely, right? So that actually is a reason to play a less powerful commander. It's a really nostalgic one for me because that was the first interaction I had where I'm like, man, this guy is playing this really underwhelming, janky commander, but he's made a really interesting deck with it. And as a deck builder, that really started to make me fall in love with deck building in the commander format. The next commander where this happened was Darien, King of Kjeldor. And of course, this was a really popular commander in the format at the time. And in fact, the most popular mono white commander in the format at the time. And again, remember guys, these are not printed in commander sets or anything like that, right? Darien was originally printed in Cold Snap. It was never meant to be a commander. And again, as a modern player, this is a card I would look at and go, oh man, that's awful. Like, oh, whenever you're dealt damage, you may create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Okay, so I have to let my opponents hit me in order to get the soldier tokens. That seems like a bad strategy. But of course, commander players, I mean Magic players in general, but commander players particularly, I think, are very inventive at coming up with ways of building around their commanders and making things work. And in particular, the interaction I loved is Tarnished Citadel, which, you know, again, that's another card that you look at and you're like, geez, that's awful. Why would you ever play that card? But of course, the downside now becomes an upside, right? Tap, add 1 mana of any color, Tarnished Citadel deals 3 damage to you. So of course, in most decks, that's awful, but in a Darien deck, you want to be dealing damage to yourself, right? Again, it's not entirely intuitive that your commander's ability can be applied to damage you're dealing yourself. Not only do you not care about people dealing damage to you, you're going to deal damage to yourself. That's how you're building this commander. And of course, I'm watching this guy play his deck and I'm like, I mean, okay, I get it. You're dealing damage to yourself with your own stuff to create the soldier tokens, but I mean, look at your life total, right? And then of course he plays a Soul Warden. Oh, okay. So as you create the tokens, you're creating that many tokens, which then gains you that much life with your Soul Warden, and then you just gain it all back. Wow. Really, really clever. I mean, it seems kind of obvious when you talk about it now, but the first time I played against the Darien deck, I thought that was so clever, the way that commander was built. And again, never meant to be a commander. This is an old legendary creature, costs 6 mana. I have never seen this card played in any other format, which again is another thing I loved about Commander that made me fall in love with the format, is all these cards that I just never saw anywhere else. Figuring out how to use these commanders, and not only figuring out how to make them work, but also make really good decks with them. Selenia Dark Angel was another one. I mean, how do you build the deck around this card, right? If you're not familiar with this, and maybe you're new to the format, you look at this and you're like, what am I supposed to do with that, right? 3 white, black, Phyrexian Angel 3/3. Flying, of course, but the only other ability you have here is pay 2 life, return it to your hand. So of course, when this card first came out, having a 5 mana 3/3 flyer was actually considered to be pretty decent back then. But also the fact that this card was essentially immune to removal is what made it really good, right? Oh, I'll just pay 2 life, return it to my hand in response to removal, and my opponent just can't get rid of it. I'll replay it the next turn, right? That was actually considered to be really good back then. And obviously this card was never meant to be a commander. In the commander format, of course, that's awful. I mean, just having a 3/3 flyer as your commander isn't very good. Even if this only costs 2 mana, that wouldn't be considered very good in the commander format. And pay 2 life to return it to my hand. I mean, I guess you can save it from removal, but again, why would you care? Because it's only a 3/3 flyer, right? But of course, inventive commander players came up with the idea of, I want to build around the advantage of I can pay as much life as I want. Well, wait, why would you want to do that, right? Because of course you can respond to her own ability, pay 2 life, and before she goes back to my hand, I respond to my own ability holding priority, pay 2 more life, pay 2 more life, right? That's how it works. Because of that, I can pay as much life as I want. Why would you want to do that? Well, because the win con, if you haven't seen it before, in every Selenia Dark Angel deck is those exchange life scenarios, right? Again, very clever, very inventive. Another commander that when I first saw it, I'm like, oh man, that card's terrible. Like, what are they doing there? And then when I saw the repay in kind, I was like, oh, now I get it. Very, very clever and very interesting. Another commander that I look at it and I go, well, what are you possibly going to do there? That just seems really, really bad. And sure enough, clever commander players figured out a great way to build around that card. Kentaro the Smiling Cat was another one that, man, when this even came out in Betrayers of Kamigawa, I was like, ugh. Again, I didn't even know the commander format was a thing. I don't know if it actually was a thing at the time or not, but when I first saw this card, I'm like, you may pay X rather than pay the mana cost for samurai spells you cast, where X is the spell's mana value. Even if you're only playing Kamigawa block, that's not a great ability. I mean, it allows you to mana fix a little, I guess. That's about it. It's really not very good. And the first time I saw this guy in the command zone, I mean, honestly, at this point, I had already been playing the commander format for a while. I had seen these other commanders. I'm figuring out more interesting things to do. I'm trying to build more underwhelming commanders at this point as well, right? I'm finding those underwhelming commanders that I possibly can build around. Kentaro was even one that I looked at and I was like, what could I possibly do here with this? Nothing. Mono white samurais? That's terrible. And again, this is another one where if you're not familiar with how a Kentaro deck typically works or how it can win the game, you're looking at this going, what the hell could you possibly do there? Mono white samurais seem really bad. Again, this is another one of those decks where I was thrilled to lose to this deck when it happened. When the guy started doing his thing, I was like, that is so clever and interesting. I am happy to lose the game to that. And of course, yes, a lot of people probably are playing mono white samurais, all of that. But what your commander does is allow you to pay generic mana for your creatures, right? Which means you can reduce that cost to essentially 0, right? So of course, I can have a Pearl Medallion and my white spells cost 1 less to cast. So if I have a samurai that costs 1, it now costs 0. So it's essentially free. If I have an Urza's Incubator out, now my samurai spells can cost 2 less to cast, because of course I'm going to choose Samurai as the creature type there. Now all my Samurais that cost 2 or less are going to be free, because again, I'm paying generic mana for it, and then the generic mana is being reduced by 2. Now we're really getting somewhere here, right? And of course, if all your stuff costs 0 mana, it's very easy to cast a whole bunch of spells in a turn. You can really get into some shenanigans once you have like a Cloudstone Curio in play, which now I can just back and forth keep bouncing that Samurai back to my hand when I recast another one, and repeat the process and essentially get infinite cast triggers. And Aetherflux Reservoir, which I don't love as a win con in the Commander format, but again, in this situation, I was totally okay with losing to it because I couldn't believe what I was witnessing happening here. This guy made a deck with this horrible commander that even I couldn't figure out how to make a good deck around, and I was losing to it, and I was happy to do so. I've never been more excited to lose a commander game. That's the kind of stuff that absolutely made me fall in love with the commander format. Finding these really interesting, unique, janky commanders that actually end up having, you know, sort of these powerful win cons in them, right? Having that Kentaro deck that looks so unassuming that can end up storming off and killing you with an Aetherflux Reservoir. It's like, okay, well, what just happened there? I was expecting almost nothing from this deck, and he ended up killing us all on a single turn. It's pretty impressive, right? Maybe the most impressive one was Mishra, Artificer, Prodigy. And again, this is another one that I had looked at myself after I had been playing the commander format for a while, and I had no idea what you could possibly do with this, because of course what this commander is doing is the opposite of what you would normally be doing in the commander format, right? 1 blue, black, and a red human artificer 4/4. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may search your graveyard, hand, or library for a card with the same name as that spell and put it onto the battlefield. If you search this way, shuffle. So we have a commander that's searching for the same name. Okay, that doesn't work very good in the commander format, where of course it's a singleton format and you're not allowed to have the same name. So what could you possibly ever do with this commander? And again, boy, was I happy to be proven wrong here. First time I played against a Mishra Artificer Prodigy deck. Again, I'm sitting there going, what could this guy possibly be doing with this commander? He can't actually go get the same name out of his library, so what's the point? Then he played a Possibility Storm, a card that I don't love in the commander format, but again, in this situation, I was ecstatic to see this work. 3 red enchantment. Whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a card that shares a card type with it. That player may cast the card without paying its mana cost. Then they put all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of their library in random order. So what happens here, if you haven't seen it before, is I cast, let's say, my Arcane Signet. Of course, my Arcane Signet will trigger my Mishra because it's an artifact spell. It will also trigger my Possibility Storm because it's just a spell. And by the way, Possibility Storm works on all your opponents as well, which is why I hate it. It really can screw up your game plan. But with the Mishra player, it's screwing you up a lot less because I'm going to have the Possibility Storm ability resolve first. I'm going to reveal cards until I, of course, reveal an artifact card. I get to cast it for free. Then my Arcane Signet goes on the bottom of my library, which of course is important because then my Mishra Artificer Prodigy ability will resolve and it allows me to search my library for a card with the same name as what I just cast. And of course, I just cast an Arcane Signet, which is now in my library, so I will get that spell anyway. So I'm just getting a free card off my Possibility Storm every time I cast an artifact. Really, really clever. Blood Funnel is another funny old interesting card that just happens to fit perfectly in your Mishra Artificer Prodigy deck. 1 and a black enchantment. Non-creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. So that seems pretty great. Again, my Arcane Signet is now free with Blood Funnel in play. However, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, counter that spell unless you sacrifice a creature. Okay, so now when I cast my Arcane Signet for free, I gotta sacrifice a creature. Or I could just not sacrifice a creature and let my Arcane Signet get countered because, of course, as I just said, I can go dig it out of my graveyard and put it directly into play. Another fantastic interaction with this commander where you're actually using the ability, and I mean, just using the ability at all is pretty impressive in the commander format, again, because it uses the same name phrase, but on top of that, you're using it to great effect here as well. So again, another commander that obviously was never meant to be played in the Commander format. I mean, clearly it wasn't, but clever Commander players figured out how to take this unique, underwhelming Commander and make it work in the Commander format, and not only make it work, but make it work quite well. And these are the kind of decks that I saw early on in the first year or so of playing the Commander format that not only made me fall in love with the Commander format and the things that were happening. Again, as a deck builder, I think it's the best format out there to be playing. It also, of course, very much made me change my strategy with deck building, with playing, with all of that. Because I thought, okay, well, maybe playing these really powerful, easy to build around commanders isn't the best way to go for a number of reasons. And I decided to go more in this direction. And I'll give a shout out to whoever those people are, right? Again, I don't have any names here that I can shout out to, but whoever you were, that guy who I first played against Mistform Ultimus, or that guy I first played against the Darien King of Kjeldor deck, maybe they didn't come up with that idea on their own. Maybe they got it from somewhere else. So I guess thank you to whoever originally came up with the idea for those decks. Really clever, interesting deck ideas that certainly inspired me to go in a different direction and certainly made me fall in love with this format, which I think is the best format in the game of Magic. That is my story for today. You guys let me know in the comments below if there is a particular commander, a particular deck, or interaction that when you first started playing the Commander format, you're like, oh man, this format is great, and I'm so glad I am playing it. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.